Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll get started in just a few moments, but while we wait, can you please let us know where you're joining from in the chat? Virginia, Ohio, DC, Maryland, Boston, more Ohio. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We will get started in just another moment, but first I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. You are all on mute. We do, however, encourage you to please use the chat box for any comments you have throughout the presentation, and please do use the Q&A to ask any questions. Regina will try to get to them throughout. Secondly, this session is being recorded and will be sent out to your inbox directly tomorrow, as well as available on our website and Regina's YouTube channel. With that, I'm very happy to introduce you to Regina Alhassan. As the CEO of ResearchPRO, Regina enjoys helping nonprofit leaders reach their highest goals. With total dollars identified in the billions, her work continues to fuel multi-million-dollar charitable giving campaigns across the country. Current secretary for the Central Ohio chapter of Association of Fundraising Professionals, Regina is also an award-winning artist, writer, philanthropist, and TEDx speaker. With that, I'm happy to pass it over to Regina for her presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bree. I am so excited to be here and to be sharing this presentation, Ain't I a Prospect? Taking a closer look at overlooked prospects. And also want to take a moment to thank iWave for being a partner in this project, for this webinar, as well as the larger Black Gives Back project. So let's get right into it. Thanks again, Bree, for that amazing introduction. And rather than getting into like the professional background, I want to hone in on some of the professional or the personal highlights here. So I really enjoy honoring and uplifting my ancestors, and that's what I'll be doing this afternoon. Also, something that many people don't know about me is that I graduated from the Ohio State University, and there I majored in American history, but I have very specific focus on African American history and women's studies. In addition to that, I ask a lot of questions. My husband doesn't really like that, but nonetheless, I ask a lot of questions, and that makes me a really good researcher. And also I like to think about big ideas. So the Black Gives Back project is a month-long project that I've been engaged in throughout the month of August in celebration of Black Philanthropy Month, which is a global celebration. And so today we are doing a live webinar, Ain't I a Prospect? But in addition to this live webinar, I'm also presenting a series of pre-recorded conversations that are available on my YouTube channel. You can also get access to them from my website. And so here are a few conversations. You can see a few conversations that have been released already, but I also have a few recordings coming up. So there's been, this project has gained a lot of momentum, started kind of as an experiment, and it continues to grow. And there are some really amazing upcoming speakers and guests as well. So today I want to set a few caveats or maybe level set just a little bit. Today really is an exploration of how I and others like me fit into the current narrative of philanthropy. So I've been in major gift fundraising my entire professional career as an employee and now currently as a consultant. But I don't see others like me on the other side as a donor, as a member, as an alum. So just that engagement often is missing for people that look like me. And this is also today is my curiosity on display. So again, I like to ask a lot of questions, I like to think about philanthropy. I love philanthropy. I love this industry. I love the practice of it. So really just curious about the way that we do the work that we do. It's also an experiment. So again, an idea. Are people interested in talking about Black philanthropy, and in what ways? It's also an invitation for you to join me in this conversation, not just today, but ongoing. So please connect with me, engage with me. Let's continue the conversation. Let's continue the work. It's also a bit of a case study, so case study-ish. As I began to do the case study work, and we'll get into this, but the results were not as pleasant as I liked. So I said, well, I need to adjust my approach here. So I want to continue with the case study, but taking a different approach. But more importantly, most importantly, today is a celebration. And I'm old school. And if you're old school like me, maybe when you see it's a celebration, you also sing it in your head. I hope I'm not the only one that does that, to the tune of Kool in the Gang. It's a celebration. And today is not me solving all of philanthropy's D&I issues. That's not my job. That's not even really what I'm interested in. Again, I'm really interested in asking questions, honoring my ancestors, and really understanding and exploring how I fit in this current narrative of capital P philanthropy. Today's also not me telling you how to get Black people to give you money. So if you've participated in any of my webinars in the past, then you know that I'm not at all interested in exploiting Black donors or funneling dollars away from those communities and not serving them. Today is also not shaming or blaming. So we're all meeting everyone where they are. We all, bring different experiences and different lenses to it. So this is not about shaming or blaming anyone, but really asking questions and pointing out some things that I've noticed. So again, most importantly, today is a celebration, and let's start celebrating. So the impetus for the title for today is Ain't I a Woman? And so one ancestor, Sojourner Truth, definitely deserves celebration for the work that she's done for not only American history, but African-American history as well. So when I think about her speech, Ain't I a Woman, and the points that she was making is in regards to being seen, displaying the characteristics of womanhood, displaying the characteristics of strength and ability and capability, but yet not being seen and not being valued. So I wanted to dig into that a little bit. And then I found this picture of Sojourner Truth, and at the bottom it says, I sell the shadow to support the substance. And I hadn't heard of that until recently, hadn't come across that until recently in preparing for this session. And that really resonated with me, the idea of, I recognize that I need to engage in social enterprise, business development, in order to fund the work that I'm doing. That's really important. And I really, again, that really resonated with me. And in looking at her using the terms and the language that we use today in professional fundraising, thinking about the relationship management, like the ultimate, like the gift officer, right? And like just amazing that she was doing that during these time periods. She lived between 1797 and 1883 and was exercising immaculate relationship management, prospect management, transactional giving, mastering transactional giving. And I believe, and so the idea of selling the shadow to support the substance is the understanding that in some ways we have to creep away from the mission in order to engage the people, but mission creep still in this example, in this instance, in her legacy, mission creep still supports the mission. And I just think that's really powerful and wanted to call her out and celebrate her as a fundraiser and as a relationship manager. So also wanted to call out, sorry, my window is covering part of my screen. Also wanted to call out James Fortin. So oftentimes, we think that Black philanthropists, that it's new, that this is something that, is modern. But no, this is something that, we're true to this. We're not new to this at all. And so using James Fortin as another example, and Deborah Aubert-Thomas, who actually the Black Gives Back conversation with her was just released earlier today. But in her TED Talk, she identifies James Fortin as an early example of African-American philanthropist. Not only an early example, but if we look at the dates, of when he was alive, 1766, 1842 to 1842. We're talking about like colonial, like early post-colonial at best. So that is just amazing to me, and definitely wanted to call out this gentleman. And I leave it to you to do the work and to learn more about who he is if you don't already know. And so I will ask, did anyone else already know about this individual? I had never heard of him before until about a week ago. And I was just blown away about his story. So he was the most wealthy businessman at his time, race aside, of all. And so he supported amazing causes and was very philanthropic. And so again, looking at the dates of when he was with us. So again, definitely something to celebrate. And I see I wasn't alone in not knowing who he was. So again, making the point that African Americans are not emerging philanthropists. Often over the 20 years, that is how I hear Black donors, that's what we call them. Oh, they're emerging, they're new. Oh, they absolutely are not. We absolutely are not. We're overlooked. And when we are able to recognize that and stand in that, I think then we're able to move forward and further advance some of our missions and further build more meaningful donor relations. And so just a few facts. If you've watched my TED Talk, you've seen me present these facts already, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on them, but I will breeze through them really quickly. The name of the TED Talk is Money, Black People, Philanthropy. If you haven't had a chance to watch it, I encourage you, and you can dig into these slides a little bit more in that presentation. But looking at the facts, and these are facts that have come out of the nonprofit industry itself, African Americans, 2/3 of African American households participate in philanthropy and make charitable donations. 30% of Black donors give because of family tradition. Black donors are twice as likely as other groups to believe that their gift makes a difference. I mean, like, talk about belief in the impact. That's critical to our donors. That's critical to our fundraising operations. African American donors also are, let me rephrase that, 41% of African American donors plan to increase their giving. And I think in comparison for white donors, like 24% of white donors report plans to increase their giving. And then Black donors have been found to be significantly more likely to give than whites. And so these are not my facts. Again, I encourage you to check out the TED Talk or get into it a little more. But these statistics are coming from the Kellogg Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, U.S. Bank Trust, Giving Compass, the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, as well as our own U.S. White House. And it was the White House Council of Economic Advisors actually that reported that Black Americans are significantly more likely to give charitable donations than whites. So these are important facts that, in my opinion, prove that Black donors are the best prospects for the country. In addition to that, we know that Black gives back via social media. So Black donors are 4 times as likely to use social media to raise funds. And the Giving USA report just came out a couple months ago and reported that the Facebook fundraising total for last year reached $6 billion. That's huge. Black people are in that space giving, absolutely, and more likely at a rate than other people. So Black absolutely gives back. And I'm not calling this out as like evidence or proof, but really more as a celebration and as a recognition of the way that we're showing up in this space. So despite all of these facts, I still find myself not being asked, not being invited to the giving party. As a prospect development professional, I can count maybe 10 while I was a staff person on staff somewhere as a full-time staff person, maybe 10 at best, non-white donors that I did research on, and that, the organizations that I worked with actively engaged at a major gift level or a principal gift level. Out of 15, 16 years of employment and identifying major gift donors, I mean, that was my specialty. Building $1 million pipelines was my specialty. And it was very few and far between that there was ever engagement with people that looked like me. So I was really curious, like, who's your prospect? And if you're in prospect development and fundraising and you have a prospect checklist, I mean, this is my checklist here. And so this is the checklist that I often teach on and present on and recommend for organizations to implement. If this looks familiar, let me know in the chat, like I use this too, or I would look at these people too. So looking at self-identified donors, that first-time donor, how especially if the first-time donor is giving 1,000 or more, 500 or more, etc. Who's grateful for you, who's grateful for your organization, whether or not they're a patient, a client, a parent, a customer, your neighbor. Does that person have a history of board service? I definitely look for that when I'm prospecting. Demonstrated volunteer history. Do they own properties? Absolutely. That's top of the list. Are they a CEO? When I'm prospecting, we certainly do analysis on job title. So I look for CEO, look for chairman, etc. Vendors. Is the organization in a contractual relationship with this particular company? Are they providing a service? Are we paying them for something? If so, then they are a great prospect for the organization. This is typical. Does the person hold elected office? Have they ever? Like, to me, these are pretty standard. Yes, I see, yes, great list. Yes, you're using similar lists. So again, I'm not like, pulling things out of the sky. But although I meet every point on this list, I can check everything on this list. This describes me to a T, but yet no one is asking me for anything. No one's asking me to serve on the board. No one's asking me for a gift, not even like a $20 annual gift. I take that back. St. Jude's does a really good job at that. And they send me, I don't know if anyone else gets this, but they send me notepads in the mail. So they do a really good job of engaging me. I don't know how I got on their list, but they reach out. So again, I need all of that. So here I am, like, ooh, signed, sealed, delivered. I'm yours, waiting for someone to engage me. Like, at the risk of outing myself, and then now you all are going to engage me. Like, I don't want to be on everyone's list all at the same time, but at the risk of outing myself, I absolutely, felt like, here I am, I'm yours. I want to serve. I want to sow into your impact. And I look around and no one is engaging me. So I decided to do a case study, and sort of the parameters, I guess, of my case study. I tried a few different things. I gave first-time gifts at various amounts, $25, $50, $250 to $350, $500, $1,000, etc. First-time gifts. I also doubled some repeat gifts, so organizations that I had previous giving history with, I doubled my gifts. And I conducted this sort of case study starting in 2019. So I also paid cash upfront for private school tuition. And so I don't call this out like to say, oh, look what I did financially, but really to call this out because I know that there are private schools or K through 12 at schools, et cetera, that are private institutions that are not engaging parents the way that they should. So that is why I call that out. And that is also a huge indicator for me when I go into an organization like that, they're K through 12, et cetera, a private school, and we're doing basic prospect development, one of the first things I ask for is who paid cash. So I tried it just to see what would happen. I also tried direct giving, meaning that I made a donation directly to the organization. I also tried indirect giving, meaning that I gave a donation through my local community foundation. And I'm here in Columbus, Ohio, and our local foundation, the Columbus Foundation, hosts something called the Big Give. And it's a large community-based fundraising campaign. People can give to a variety of organizations. And then those donations in a very specific time frame. I don't work for the foundation. I was just a donor. So I know there are some other Columbus people here like, that's not exactly, she's not describing it correctly, but it's a community-based fundraising effort centered on 1 to 2 days, I think. And then at the end of it, there is usually a large match. So it's an opportunity to amplify the donation to the organization. And I participate in the Big Give. So I did that with indirect giving so that my gifts would be matched. I also made gifts with checks and also online. So I was curious about like if I did it in person with a check or sent a check in the mail versus making a gift online. I also made gifts to clients, so organizations that I had financial relationships with, non-clients as well, and colleagues. So I made gifts to organizations where I knew the executive leadership, I knew the executive fundraiser, and I also made gifts to organizations that were just complete strangers to me. So as I began this case study and continued to make donations over a couple of years, the results were pretty dismal and got to the point that I almost decided not to, and I'm still on the fence. Like it can't be the case study in a traditional sense because the results were so dismal and so disappointing. And I did not want to risk identifying any of the organizations because again, this is not about blaming or shaming. This really was just like, what's going on? No one's asking me, well, I'll just start giving, and then maybe there will be some engagement there. Again, asking questions and just curious. So as a result of my little mini case study or the beginnings of my case study, there were some instances, acknowledgements came over 6 months later. In 6 months, like 6 to 9 months is probably more realistic. There were instances where I never got an acknowledgement ever, not to this day. There was one specific organization that cashed my check months later after the in-person fundraising event, and I never even got an acknowledgement. I didn't get an impact story, and no one asked why I gave. And it looks like we have a question.
Yes, Virginia is asking, how many charities did you give to? How many were super slow with acknowledgements, and how many gave no acknowledgement at all?
Yeah, so it was at least 12, and I should have prepared that number. There were at least 12. There were at least 12. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, and I should have prepared that number. So again, there were at least 12, and I will say that there is one that has begun to send me mail. I get an appeal from them routinely, but that has also slowed down. So I would say out of that, it was 12 to 15, one that I would say, really was like picked up. It was like, okay, now I'm on the list. Now I'm getting mail, but that's it. But that one that has begun to send me the appeals, they also did not ask why I gave. So some other results that I experienced. So my name was misspelled in donor recognition list. which I thought was interesting in a couple of instances because I provided my own information online. So in theory, it would be a data download and import that wouldn't require any manipulation to what I reported and what I typed out, but nonetheless, my name was misspelled. My company name, ResearchPRO, was recognized as the ResearchPRO or ResearchPRO. And while that may not seem important to you as an entrepreneur that is, developing and managing their brand, this is incredibly important, especially when I'm participating in a corporate giving program. So again, no invites, very few emails. As I mentioned, there was one organization that began reaching out, but I never got invited to anything. Yeah. So that was unfortunate. I'll add to that. So I did get one invitation. Last year I gave to 2 years ago. I gave to an annual fundraiser for an organization. And so the following year, I did get an email invite to participate in that annual fundraiser again. And a couple of days later, I got an email from one of the staff members telling me that me receiving that invitation was a mistake. So not quite sure, wasn't quite sure how to interpret that. We have another question.
Yes, Mark is asking, what do you attribute to this poor stewardship to?
Yeah, so I have some ideas. So again, not about blaming or shaming. I think this speaks to what I see across the board within our industry. All organizations are struggling with this. And I have some recommendations later in the presentation, but I meet so many individuals and nonprofit leaders, et cetera, that are not practicing the basics of sending out an acknowledgement letter. And I really don't know why we aren't engaging in that. Often what I hear is they just don't have time. They don't have anyone that's dedicated to do it. So then it gets done by an occasional volunteer. We're just not prioritizing this. And that is what I see by far. It's not that in some instances, it's not that they don't know. They don't know the standards. They absolutely do. They just don't do them. And so I'm really curious about that too. Like, why aren't we? Why aren't people doing this? And I would push that question back to the attendees today. Why don't you do this? I'm really curious. And so also I will point out in one scenario, there was also a broken gift agreement. I signed up for a specific giving campaign, a giving program. And then after I made my gift, I was informed that that particular program had shifted and the recognition that I anticipated went away. And so that was that situation. So again, all of these results were disappointing, to be quite honest, very, very bleak. And I know that we can do better, but this also, gave me pause. Like, do I really want to pursue this case study? I don't want to be in a position to out these organizations. These organizations are doing incredible work. These leaders are amazing people, that I do respect. But we do also have to call these things out and take a look at the way that we operate as an industry, especially when it comes to our prospect development. And when we say that we lack diversity and we can't reach new audiences. No, we can't if we can't send a thank you letter.
We did have a couple of questions come in through the chat. The first one from John is, did you ever see ask amounts that you think reflected your prospect indicators and behaviors?
Does that mean, like, did I make these gifts? No, because no one came back and said, oh, like, you were $1,000 donor. They didn't segment me out in that way and then come back and say, can you now do 2,500? Can you now do 5,000? No one has done that at all. No, I did not. I haven't decided not to give to these organizations altogether. There are a few that I definitely still support. There are a couple that I just never got any acknowledgement for whatsoever. No, I don't give them any more money. So another way that I approached this sort of case study was taking a look at my own neighborhood, like where I physically reside. So within my own neighborhood, there are over 10 nonprofits. I stopped counting at about 18. Some of those nonprofits were really small, looked like they were based out of residential homes, et cetera. But about 10 to 15 nonprofits that are large, have external spaces, et cetera, have overhead or have a facility, et cetera. So there are 10 to 15 nonprofits within 10 miles of my home. So that's a 5 to 10 minute drive, 35 miles per hour. So I speed, but so 5 to 10 minutes. There are 4 within walking distance of my home, 4 that are within walking distance and that I know have multi-million-dollar budgets and multi-million-dollar fundraising goals. These organizations represent a variety of causes: youth development, arts and culture, community foundations. There are two community foundations within 10 miles of my home. Human services, general society, aid and well-being, faith-based organizations, as well as early childhood literacy. I have yet to receive a newsletter from any of these organizations in my neighborhood. I have yet to be invited to any open house. I've been living in my neighborhood. I own my home. I've been here as a property owner since 2009. Yeah, so that's really interesting to me. And the idea of the ways that we engage are not our immediate neighbors as nonprofit organizations. And this idea also came out in the Black Gives Back conversation with Kobe Williams, who is CEO of New Reach Community Consulting. And I think I saw Kobe dial in when we got started. So this idea that our organizations, these nonprofits, are we even engaging our immediate neighbors? And oftentimes we're not. I mean, I know we're not. I'm asking a rhetorical question here because I know that we're not. And so I really want to call that out as a missed opportunity. I have a question here. Yeah, how do you determine proper acknowledgement? Yeah, so how do you determine the proper acknowledgement and the investment on the acknowledgement? So I once did a study because I worked at an organization and somebody, it was a sort of like arts and culture organization, sort of like a museum, and somebody at the, I forget what they call it, but someone at the front door decided it would be great to ask everyone that came in for $1. And so then we had to do gift processing on $1 on the gifts for $1 and send out the acknowledgement letters for gifts for $1. And I thought that was ridiculous. So I did the math and determined that everything that was under $5 cost the organization to acknowledge. And I'm laughing a little bit about that situation. I can laugh about it now. But when you are looking at like how much we invest, do the math. How much does it cost? How much is the postage? How much is the time, the salary time for the person doing the gift processing, for the person, stuffing the envelopes if you don't have a mailing machine, for the person, potentially carrying the envelopes to the mail to the post office. All those things, add that up. And then I would use that as a baseline to the value of, like, if it costs you more money to acknowledge the gift than the actual gift, then we don't want to do that. That, we can assume, I think the donor doesn't want us to do that either. So that is one way to gauge. So in sort of building out or approaching or trying to build out a case study, taking a look at the at, what's going on around me, I definitely, identified some industry calls to action for us as nonprofit professionals, as fundraising professionals, et cetera. So I want to move into those. So there's the Donor Bill of Rights. Those of us in fundraising should be familiar with this. And so I won't go into all 10 of the rights that the Association of Fundraising Professionals and other organizations have created for donors. But the key elements here is a certain level of respect for our supporters. We value our supporters. There's an expectation of transparency, a sense of reciprocity. We need each other. We're on equal footing here. There is information will be made available, and there's access to the organization itself. So in a sense, or overall, these are some of the overarching values that come out of the Donor Bill of Rights. And again, we should all be familiar with this. But at the same time, I recognize that these values, these principles, et cetera, don't necessarily get applied to me as just a general human being in this world. Definitely not as a citizen, as a Black woman, a citizen of the United States. It doesn't necessarily get applied to me as a Black professional in a predominantly white institution. So I, just kind of pushed and continuing to kind of dig into this, like, well, who is this Bill of Rights for, really? Because these principles don't necessarily get applied to Black people. I mean, we know that, which is the whole point of Black Lives Matter, like to prove that Black lives do matter and these principles should be applied. So thinking about that Bill of Rights and wondering, where do I fall in this? And are organizations prepared to really afford me and people like me these respect and value and transparency and reciprocity, information and access? And I absolutely understand that, this is a journey. And so it's not about like blaming or shaming an organization for what their history may be, but it is absolutely a pause and a call to action to like do some reflection and figure out how we really do apply these principles. So it also got me to think about a prospect Bill of Rights. So again, I'm a prospect development professional. So I'm in major gift fundraising, but prospect development is my jam. And so prospect Bill of Rights, do we have one? We don't have one. Should we have one? And if so, what would that look like? And I'll be honest here, I don't have a perfect answer for this, but just really, again, an invitation for you to join this conversation and join this journey. And my thought process here, should we have a prospect Bill of Rights? And what would that look like? How would we infuse respect and value into that? Especially as prospectors, we are basing so much of our assessment on net worth. And so that is a real hard dollar value. And do we lose sight of other people when we focus on that? So I've been in prospect development, most of my career, and I absolutely understand why we do that. I do it all day, every day as well. But still, what are we leaving on the table, as it were? It looks like we have a question.
Yes, Kobe is asking, is a giving report that includes disaggregated data a common practice in this field?
Leave it to Kobe to to ask such a challenging question. I would love to hear what others have to say about that as well. So, I don't want to say yes, but I feel like I definitely understand how the answer could be yes. Let's see, iWave. In some ways, absolutely, because the giving reports and the impact reports are showing positive numbers. Like, that's the point of it. And there's not always an opportunity to really get into like what didn't work, the failures, the shortcomings. Where did we fall short, and where do we need, some additional investment, et cetera. So I think that's a bit of a tricky question. We are transparent about the way that money is used, but I would say I feel comfortable saying that impact reports definitely have a positive slant. They are made for donors to feel good.
We have another question from Allison, and it is, do you think it would be appropriate for an organization to ask donors to self-identify their race or ethnicity when they make a gift? I would love to offer increased attached to donors of color to help grow our engagement beyond white donors, but it's hard to tell who they are with the donors we haven't met in person or know well yet.
Yeah. Yes. So this is a loaded question as well. And there are different, people fall on different sides of the aisle on this one. I fall on the side of, if you want to know something about me, ask me. Ask me and, have a reason for asking me. Be mindful of, have a reason for asking me. Be transparent about how you're going to use my information. Be prepared that if you ask me for information, I'm going to ask you for information. I'm going to expect to be engaged. And I would call out that APRA, which is the Professional Organization for Prospect Development, has released a DEI data guide. And so I would encourage you to check that out and refer to that as you're building out a diverse prospect development program focused on sort of diversifying your prospect pools. I fall on the side of ask. Use it as an opportunity for donor engagement, stewardship, and to deepen the relationship. And I also hear people say that are very cautious about just asking outright, because there is a concern that that information will be used to further detriment communities of color. And I absolutely recognize that possibility. I personally just prefer to move forward with good intention and a positive mindset. And I find it curious, nonprofit professionals who default to that as a reason why not to ask, that quickly default to, oh, we won't ask because that information might be used to further exclude them. Oh, well, then that lets me know what you're trying to do. And that's just my response to that. So moving forward. So absolutely, and I'm going to start to run through these here in the interest of time. So we absolutely have a lot of work to do, right? And we absolutely need to do better. Learn the business of fundraising, especially for newer organizations. Fundraising is such an important part of having a nonprofit. And you have to learn the industry standards, learn them and practice them. Don't sleep on individual giving. Individual giving still represents about 70 to 75% of all giving year to year. So don't sleep on individual giving. If you got a major grant, awesome, kudos. That's the perfect time to start to build your individual pipeline. Get the data. So if you put the data on a giving form, put the data on your website, fund, data capture, pop up, etc. Get the data, build the relationships, join the professional group. So we have the Association of Fundraising Professionals as well as APRA. I'm surprised by how many fundraising professionals I meet that just are not involved in either of those organizations or something similar. And then most importantly, say thank you. I mean, that's a basic. That gets back to do better. Like, why don't people, why do I think I had those results? I really don't know, but it absolutely is an opportunity to do better. I think we also have an opportunity to sort of be the leaders of the new school in fundraising and philanthropy. Stop saying we can't find diverse whatever, and reframe that and really understand that So we're not shaming here, but I will say, and if you agree with me, drop it in the chat. Whenever I hear a colleague say, we just can't find diverse donors, members, job applicants, etc., just can't find diverse board members, what I hear is, we're just not looking. We're just not trying. And if you hear that too, you hear something similar, say, I agree. It's not just me that's hearing that. I love that it's not just me. So here's an opportunity to be the change as it relates to policy, create new policies, implement and enforce policies, be the change as it relates to paying our staff and our consultants, be the change in the language that we use. Do we need to come up with new language for different communities, for our own selves and our own work? Engaging our neighbors, prospecting in historically red line districts, engaging non-donors. Generally, about half of Americans don't give. That's a huge prospect pool. Why aren't we engaging them in any way? Ask our constituents to donate, whether or not they're clients or customers or people we're serving. Ask them to donate. And imagine ourselves out of a job. What would happen if the missions that we're serving were absolutely fulfilled? What would happen if everyone had food and hunger went away? What if every child had books? What if every child had a home and that went away? You know, what? Just imagine ourselves out of a job and operate in that space. So an ancestral call to action, and I'll move through these quickly. So back to James Fortin, get the bag is the #1 call to action. Again, he was the wealthiest person of his era. Abolition and agency are the things that he supported. Social justice is what he supported. And I'm really, really curious about the idea of him being the real grandfather of philanthropy. So often we associate that with John Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie, but looking at his lifetime compared to when they were born. So he died. When he died, John Rockefeller was what, 3? And Andrew Carnegie was what, 7? So who's the real grandfather of philanthropy? Another example, another ancestral call to action, W.E.B. Du Bois was alive between 1868 to 1963. And I have 2 pictures of him here. So often we think of these people as like old time, like just so far away, doesn't really relate, that isn't relevant. 1963, like my mom graduated high school in 1968. In 1968, the Fair Housing Act was implemented. So, I mean, this is not like ancient history. This absolutely is current and modern history. I also have a picture in color of him. Like this picture is from the 40s and he looks so like this is my uncle, I love this. But in 1898, he put forth a call for unified strategic philanthropy to Black people. So for us to give with intention and to create space for action and change that directly supports us. Sojourner Truth, again, called for business, social enterprise, business development, equitable leadership, collective action, equitable funding. So my talk with Deborah called out the inequity, the funding gap for women, especially women and girls of color. Only 1.6% of all giving supports women and girls. And giving to women and girls of color from foundations is less than 0.5%. In comparison, back to my favorite fundraiser, Mary McLeod Bethune was raising money directly for women and girls. So our ancestors have answers for us. Our ancestors were able to do more with less. So I think about, Mary McLeod Bethune, 1875 to 1955, and what she was able to do in the 1800s, in the early 1900s, fresh off of anti-literacy laws. Like literally, we know what that means. Without a CRM, without iWave, without MailChimp, and all these things that we now rely on, but yet still we have a disconnect. So they're able to do more with less. And I encourage us to remember on whose shoulders we stand. another shot of my favorite fundraiser and the legacy, that Black philanthropists, that Black fundraisers, Black gift officers, Black executive leaders, etc., continue to lead. So here then is my legacy, and just kind of calling out a comparison to this current equity, this funding gap that we're experiencing, and just calling out how Mary McLeod Bethune absolutely centered women and girls. Higher ed was her space. She built colleges. Higher ed is my background. And so to imagine her as in that space, it's just amazing to me. Healthcare, higher ed and healthcare, is where I spend most of my time. So she also created a hospital, and think about, the hospital and the healthcare fundraising and that specific sector of fundraising, and to know that she was there in that space, and she was also lobbying our federal government. So really quickly, what's your giving language? We know like some things that have come out from our conversations, the words that we use as Black people: a blessing to someone, a little something for someone. Ubuntu is another word that comes out of South Africa. I am because you are. The Nguzu Saba was adopted in 1966 for Kwanzaa, but yet it comes out, the language is Swahili, coming out of East Africa. And so these ideas that are represented in the giving language of Black people. In comparison, what's your giving language within philanthropy? We know that word comes from ancient Greece. The words that we're using now: love of humanity, major donors, donor-centric. And this is great, but I'm not Greek. This doesn't represent me. And I like to see representation, and I want to see my ancestors represented. So I decided to go back and take a look at ancient Kemet. When we talk about Black philanthropy, the agreed upon research is that there is no start date. No one can identify a start date for Black philanthropy in the United States. No one can identify a start date for philanthropy in other parts of the African diaspora as well. So this is an opportunity for us to go back before and look at our ancient ancestors. And when we look at that, then I go to Ma'at and the idea of truth, justice, balance, order, reciprocity, and harmony. For me, is this the true word? Is Ma'at the foundation for Black philanthropy? I think it is. And when we talk about language, this may be a call to action specifically for Black donors and Black fundraisers, but I think there's an opportunity for us to lean into the Ma'at, into our inherent truth, justice, balance, order, reciprocity, and harmony. So another thing to celebrate as it relates to our giving language, something else that came out of the conversations is this sense of resiliency. Black giving is part of our story of resiliency here in the United States, and I would wager as well as across the African diaspora. And that's something to be incredibly proud of and celebrate. So I ask you, who's your prospect? Self-identified first-time donor, first-time donors of 1,000 or more, the grateful, someone that has a history of board service, demonstrated volunteerism, owns multiple properties, owns their business, has a massive personal and professional network, has a propensity to secure the bag. Right now, Black women are outpacing everyone else in small business startup. They have a cultural tendency to give. Is that your prospect? Is your prospect the person that has an ancestral, genetic call to give? And I would pose to you again, ain't I a prospect? I think I am, but no one is asking me. So this has been a lot of fun. I thank you for kind of taking this journey with me. I want to say thank you to iWave again for their amazing support. for their technical support today and their partnership. Thank you to everyone that is participating and will check out the videos after this. Just again, thank you. And let's see if I see a question. All right, awesome. It has been my pleasure. Check out the chat here.
Thank you so much, Regina. I'm going to pop in all of the contact information, your YouTube channel, the TEDx talks, and if you have anything else where the people can find you, please let them know.
Awesome. Enjoy the rest of your day. Celebrate Black Philanthropy Month. Engage a Black constituent. Support a Black business.